Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. I'm Lara Lane White, your host, and I'm glad that we're here today. Thank you so much for joining. Author Max Lucado's book, entitled "You'll Get Through This: Hope and Help for Your Turbulent Times." In his book, he encourages readers that reconciliation and redemption are made available through our circumstance. As many have already said during this time, that although it may seem hard to believe, we will get through this troubling time. Tonight, the Women's Laboratory will examine some of today's most challenging justice issues. We will give our perspectives on what's happening in our communities, the politics of COVID-19 and its impacts, as well as engage in dialogue from the unique woman's perspective. Joining us are some of my colleagues in the ministry, and I will give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about who they are. Reverend Holeness, why don't you start? I believe you have yourself muted.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Holeness-Roland. I am an AME itinerant ordained elder, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I am a mother of 2 children. I'm a wife. I am a human being. And from a professional perspective, I work with youth at Big Bethel AME Church. So I serve families and youth at Big Bethel, which is located in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am a chaplain at Grady Hospital.
Okay, outstanding. Reverend Lewis, why don't you go ahead and start us out? I believe you have yourself muted as well. Dr. Lewis.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Lewis. I attend Big Bethel AME Church, and I also am founder of Virtuous Pearl, which is an interdenominational women's ministry where we study God's word through the eyes of a woman. I am also a professor of education at Spelman College, and I am delighted to join you all this evening.
Thank you so much. Reverend Haigler, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I think this is your first time with us tonight, and we're glad you have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been trying for a long time to get on, so today was just a great day. Okay, so I am Dee Haigler, and I am a itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and this is actually my 20th year being ordained, and so I'm so excited about that. And God has really moved me through the social justice part of ministry, and it has shown up. I have served in numerous capacities, whether it has been an elected official, a government appointee, a lobbyist, a campaign manager, and now a television correspondent. So God has allowed me to use my ministry to show up in all those forms to make sure that the least, the last, and the lost are taken care of.
That's right. Amen. Dr. Buckson.
Hello. How are you? My name is Susan Buckson, and I am the pastor of Allen Temple, Atlanta, and it is absolutely a phenomenal opportunity to be here and share with you. I am starting my 2nd year there as the pastor. I am a 29-year veteran of public education, urban public education, both in Baltimore, Maryland, as well as in Atlanta public schools. I have a heart for the topic tonight, so I'm interested and to see where we go.
Yeah, I'm interested also, and I appreciate the perspectives that each of you brings. From being political correspondent to being in education to being a young mother of two small children and also being a college professor. So I really do appreciate the perspectives that each of you bring to us tonight. There's a lot to talk about. We wanted to model this particular show uh, because it gives us an opportunity to kind of give our perspective on the latest topics of interest that are impacting our community in the wake, especially within the wake of the pandemic. We earlier in the week, the White House, representative from the White House, basically, said that the COVID-19 is at this point the virus is totally harmless. And I'm quoting, totally harmless.
Mhm.
We have 24 states, 26 states, I'm sorry, now reporting record high confirmed cases of COVID-19. And 15 to 20% of those cases are requiring hospitalizations. Hospitalizations are going up in at least 3 states. And so just in the wake, since we have reopened, if you will, our states, which in my opinion, and before I let everybody else talk, is, it's about the economy, and I think until we have a vaccine, I think this is one of the things that we're going to have to deal with. So I'll just open up. I'll just ask who wants to start in this conversation. I mean, we know that COVID-19 is rearing its ugly head. And from a political standpoint, I mean, we're having to do a tango with the White House. I mean, I don't know, Reverend Hagen, what do you think?
Now you would start with me because I have so much I could say. I got to be very careful because I'm coming to y'all today as a preacher. So let me get this together. So COVID-19 is dangerous. And so when people think about it, we're not just talking about something in Georgia, United States. This is a world pandemic, a global pandemic. And we are treating this in America as though this is a political issue. And it's very disturbing, especially every time I go on television or speak to people in other countries. They are alarmed at the backward and leadership that we have, a lack of leadership in the United States of America. Many people don't even want us to come to, outside of our borders because they feel like if they allow it, they're going to be some kind of way contaminated as well. So we have got to get on top of this. Even today, Governor Kemp sent out a statement in Georgia saying that there's no way that Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms can enforce a mask ordinance, and that was a bit much. And now I'm just trying to figure out, you can send out the National Guard for to deal with unrest, but you haven't sent out the National Guard to deal with COVID cases rising in the state of Georgia. I mean, I think it's just absolutely ridiculous. And so my heart really goes out to parents who have young children who have to go back to college like mine, those who are teaching the children, people on the campus, everybody in between. I mean, this is the most ignorant thing I have ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of ignorant stuff, but now you have people's lives as young as 2 or 3 in jeopardy, because that's what a lot of them sometimes go to, to pre-K. So this is just absolutely backwards, because I can't say what I want to say.
Well, you can feel free to say whatever you want.
Well, it's asinine. It's absolutely asinine, and I just can't even understand it.
Anybody else have anything they want to add?
Yes, I'll add to that. I think that what Reverend Dee said was so on point, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the education piece. And today, I believe it was, or yesterday, where 45 said that he was going to withhold federal funding from school systems that do not go face to face. So that's one part of it. But then also, if you look at the plans that many of these school systems have, like I have 2 sons, and if I look at the plan that their school system has rolled out, it really penalizes children if you choose the virtual option, because the options are limited and they almost alienate you from the physical school if you try virtual. So for example, all of the course offerings, if you're an honor student or you're an AP student, special education student, you're not getting your true services. And then they cut you off and they don't allow the students to participate in extracurricular activities. So it's almost like they are punishing you for choosing a safe option to attend school in the fall. And then you have many of the colleges that are also putting out plans. And we just have to be careful that we're not putting finances over human bodies because, you know, human bodies are the ones that make this, we make up the world, not money. And so we just have to be really careful where we're putting our focus when we make all these decisions that are affecting our children that are, you know, going to school as pre-K all the way up to law school, med school, PhD. So from every level, students are being affected.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. A lot of proponents for education are saying that that we really do need to try to keep the kids in the in-person format because it's an opportunity for them to develop social skills. And also, a lot of kids are being, that may not be in favorable living situations. The school is the place where they have a safe space. Um, and I just feel like, it's, I don't know how safe a space the school will be, in the wake of this pandemic. And I mean, I agree with what the education proponents say, but I'm not sure how safe a space, health-wise, that the school system will provide. Does anybody else have any? Dr. Buckson, I know you have plenty to say.
Well, one of the things that I am very concerned, of course, my entire career has been keeping children central. And a lot of the data that people are showing is saying that children are not being affected in the same at the same rate as those 18 and older, but also children are not necessarily being tested in the same way. So you really don't know you really don't know what that is, what that looks like, and the extent of what it looks like as children who may be asymptomatic. Because as a teacher, I'm very clear that there were tons of germs already there. When I first went to middle school, that was the first time in my life I had ever developed pink eye, right? And so it is, and I'm not just saying it's just people who are in middle school, but I just equate that with the fact that there were so many years that I really didn't get sick. I was exposed to a lot of different children, adults who were ill, because we don't like to say I'm ill and so I'm just going to stay home, and we have mom and dad who are going to say you have to go to school anyway because I have to go to work. And so it has always kind of, I don't mean to sensationalize it in this manner, but it's always been a petri dish situation when
Right.
you have a lot of different children together in any given space. And that's just a reality of it. But I am very concerned about the human resources aspect of it for teachers, because there are many teachers who fall into that risk category. We have older teachers in many districts, and they are not, and not only that, but they're also going to be going home. They're going to be going home to other family members, having been with other people in schools. We just, yeah, it's just a whole lot of cogs to going back to school that really, I don't really think that there is a practical way other than not being in a school building. There's a practical way to guard against everything that we're really trying to guard against. There really is not. And you have to do it school by school. You have to do it case by case, because there's not a mass way in order to get everybody back into a school building. There just isn't.
No, that's true.
I think something that
Anybody else?
keeps coming up for me, Dr. White, is the flaws of leadership based on everything that you all have said and just everything that we're seeing on a daily basis. They're consistently I feel as though we're consistently at a crossroads as of late where we are dealing with flaws in leadership. My children are age 3 and 1, and I had no idea what an essential business truly. I did not know quite what it was prior to all of this. And then when we found out what an essential business was and what essential businesses are. My son's school and my daughter's school was qualified as an essential business, and I was very surprised. So we've been doing online classroom classes for both of my children, and about a week ago we were getting ready to start sending them back to school because I don't have the privilege of working at home. I've been in the hospital working uh, on a daily basis, and so we really needed some help, and we just found out that a teacher has COVID. And so it is really putting us in a very difficult situation. But it's clear that from the very start of this, there was a lack of leadership. And you can see it across the board in almost every industry as people are wondering what they're going to do. Here we are in July trying to figure out what these kids are going to do in August. I just think there is an overall general lack of leadership and a clear passing of the ball all the way around. And so I'm just wondering how you all are seeing that as well, actually.
So when you say a lack of leadership, are you referring to you say, I know you said overall, but are you saying
Yes, and in every industry.
okay, education, politics? Um,
Yeah, I mean, we're putting it all on 45, right? And so here we all are women, we are all considered women of the cloth. And so when you think about it, it's even in our own church. So, the reality is we talk about government and the things that are going on there, and we have our own set of injustices. So I think across the board, it makes people very uncomfortable to go ahead and take accountability for what they're doing. And so I think in talking about others, we also have to see what our part is in that pie as well. And I'm seeing that there's so many layers to it. People are saying that it's all 45, sure, but these systems have been in place prior to him. So, all of these things existed, and all of these flaws that are now illuminated because of COVID-19 and this global pandemic. I mean, all of these things have now become illuminated, but they truly existed prior to that. And so it was very interesting
Yeah.
to me as someone in the hospital. There was all this conversation about how this is impacting us equally. And, it was such an issue when it was impacting us equally. As soon as they said, I saw them pulling people out of the hospital quickly that had pre-existing conditions. As soon as they said that it impacted African Americans
uh-oh. Oh, she was saying something powerful too.
It's all right. As soon as they said it was affecting African Americans disproportionately, we'll come back to it. There she is.
Okay, so Allie, say that again. As soon as what was the reaction that you saw as soon as it became apparent that it was affecting the African American population specifically? What would you say? Because I think we lost you right after that.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I was just saying that when we heard about it originally, they talked about it as though it was impacting everyone equally. They said, it has no color, it has no gender, it's impacting all of us, and we don't know what's going on. As soon as they started talking about African Americans being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, we heard a lot of very limited conversation. There was no more in terms of moving people, and things just completely changed, and it seemed as though there was a push and a rush to sort of open things back up again. And as we're seeing all of these things unfold, it just looks very tragic to me.
Wow.
Okay. Anybody else? That's a very powerful perspective, and one of the reasons why I value your being on this panel is because for me, you represent this millennial age group that's very active, and I have to admit that I'm still trying to understand that perspective, and so you being a part of this is very valuable. Does anybody else have anything to add to what we were talking about in terms of its impact on the school system? I know we started talking about 45 and one other thing I wanted to ask too. Well, I think we'll get to that later. And that's about how is the church responding, and some of the things that the AME church is doing is very interesting to me. And so I'll talk about that a little bit later. But in a Pew Center survey, we found that the findings from the Pew Center in the survey they took, I think they had over 4,500 participants, but they felt that they have experienced more than usual discrimination in the wake of COVID-19, and most of it is due to the notion of having to wear a mask. Now, we know that here in Atlanta, our mayor has joined other mayors in the state of Georgia to make it a requirement to wear a mask when out in public. But there is not just Georgia, but it's states across the country that are adopting said policies. And it's interesting because Reverend Haigler, I did not even, I hadn't heard that the governor, what the governor said with regard to Mayor Bottom today. But I mean, we hear similar stories about that. What you guys, tell me what your perspective is on wearing the mask, and what have been your observations so far?
Okay, so I want to say something about that. So let's start off with, in Georgia, there was a hate crime bill that was passed. And in this bill, it made it a crime just to wear a mask, right? But they had to rescind that because they didn't have the wherewithal to think through that maybe a mask is not necessarily equate to crime or what that looks like when they're trying to adjudicate justice. Now, in some other states, they have even said that African Americans don't have to wear your mask because we don't know if it's criminal behavior. We want to be sure. That's a problem in itself if you just see a Black person with a mask and you assume that they're committing some type of crime. And so I can see why the Pew poll would say something like there is an uptick in people feeling like they're being discriminated against because of the color of their skin. And so we know why Asians or Asian Americans are feeling it, because the president, with his ridiculous self, has called this thing the Kung flu, the China flu, anything derogatory. He wants to, associate that with Asian people. So their discrimination is really coming from white people who just think they have brought this flu to America. So they got to deal with that. Black people in general, we're always going to be the most scapegoat because of, the essence of who they see us as. And so then we have to deal with that on top of a doggone pandemic. So really, we're dealing with we're dealing with racism and COVID-19 all at the same time. And so that is an extra burden on people of color, especially African Americans and Asians. And the only reason Hispanics numbers is not as high, I promise you, it's because they probably just need to take as many tests. But a lot of, those people who consider themselves Hispanic, they may consider themselves white Hispanics. Trust me now, because, they have a saying in the Hispanic community that money will make you white. And so certain Hispanics feel like they're white. They're not even Hispanic per se. But that's a discussion for another day.
That's another segment. That's interesting. I never heard it before today. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And so just today, in the news today, we had, I don't know if any of you are aware, but there was a gentleman who is the CEO of a technology company in California that was filmed it was caught on video at a restaurant making racial comments out loud to a table that had a family an Asian family, and so all of it was caught on video. And so, of course, in today's internet culture, it went viral. And so now, he's, as a matter of fact, his company is based in Silicon Valley. So now, he's very apologetic to what's being said, to what he said rather, and all the backlash that he's getting. So you have a very strong point that that the racial environment is very is very active right now, very volatile, if you will, right now. And so a lot of people are having some issues with. We see it every day with wearing a mask.
Well, I think that we have I'm clear that we're just kind of seeing it because it's being filmed. We know that all of these racial incidents have been happening for years, and and so I'm not. I am very concerned that there are people who are racist. I get it, but I am so much more concerned. And I'll go back to to what my sister said. There are some things that we have to get together for ourselves, that we have to make sure that we're doing. Um, the point of us, a lot of times when you talked about Allie, the lack of leadership, right? I don't even think I'm looking to the leadership as those people who are in the offices. I very much so am. I get that they have a responsibility, but in many cases we've put them there. And I'm looking for a leadership when you talk about what the church's response is, and not just the church, but the community response is to make sure that we are leading. Like, remember, our schools are zone schools.
Yes.
It makes absolutely no sense that and I had for 29 years, I can go to any PTA meeting, and I can walk into a PTA meeting, and there will often be more staff at that meeting than there are parents and community leaders. And when we don't show up to make sure that we say, this is what we want for our schools, and just in that instance, there are several other. But when we say we're not going to show up for our schools, people then they have carte blanche to do whatever they want where they are without being checked. And I really think that as a community, it is our responsibility at this point to really start the cry of, put your voice and your presence where your feelings are, not just to show up when something happens, but in the times where day to day life is going on. We need to be active and present in these spaces so that before people make a decision, they know that the parents in the community, the church in the community, the businesses in the community have something to say, and they're going to check with them first. We've made it too easy for people to kind of just do what they want to do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I wanted to touch on, Dr. White, you were talking about the mask wearing, and the mayor of Atlanta putting forth a policy on wearing masks as being mandatory. When I don't go out a lot, but when I do go out,
Right.
people aren't wearing masks. The restaurants are crowded like there's nothing going on. The barbershops are crowded. The beauty salons and the beauty supply stores, the sneaker stores. As I drive up and down the main road, these people do not have on masks. And how do we get our people, many of them are young people who are out congregating, they do not have on a mask. And I don't know if they feel like the virus can't touch them, but I just don't know how we can bring more awareness out. And that's also tied back to the leadership piece. But how do we get the word out so these young people will stop congregating without wearing masks? Like, do they not understand what they're doing? And then you even have some older people who they'll go out and don't have a mask. And I've seen people in the grocery store, the parent may have on a mask, but they don't have a mask on their child. I just think we need to have greater grassroots level education on the virus.
But you know what, Doc? If I can say this, there are a lot of schools that are saying they want to make sure that children even come in with masks. I want y'all to be very clear about this one thing. It is difficult unless people are actually, and I'm sad to say this, but there are many places, many schools where you're not even getting your child to wear a polo shirt and a pair of pants and a uniform.
That's right.
That you are requiring. You're saying it's a mandatory uniform school, and there's absolutely no teeth. And I believe that's what you're saying. There's no teeth behind us saying to children that they must have on a mask in a school building when for years we have not even been able to require students to actually have on a uniform. So
And
that
this
might
goes
be the
back,
rule and the regulation, but it's not. But it's not. You can't uphold it.
but this goes back to that lack of leadership that Ali was talking about. Ali, when she said, "See, I just came back from being in Virginia a month with my husband. So, but I went with in April for a month, and then I went back again for a month. So the dynamics were different based on the leadership in place because they
Correct.
didn't play that best in Virginia and in Maryland and in DC. And they also didn't play it in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut because what has happened is Democratic governors made sure that the message was right from the top down. And so you weren't going to walk into the grocery store, you weren't going to the gas station, you weren't coming anywhere without a mask on your face. So when my children came up for Memorial Day, this is between my 19-year-old to my 28-year-old, they were blown away that they had to literally wear their mask everywhere they went. It's like, oh, so Virginia's not playing. No, Virginia's not playing because the leadership in Virginia has said this is how it's going to go. So this is why our vote, and I'm not trying to switch the subject, it matters because had we had a Democratic governor in Georgia, the dynamics would have been different and people would have had masks on because he
But
would have said
Dee,
it's mandated.
but
So
listen,
it comes from the head top down.
let me say this: the fact that you just noted that if we had Democratic leadership, truly epitomizes the fact that this pandemic has been repackaged as a political on the political agenda. So
It has.
it is amazing to me that we continue to politicize critical issues when we know that this is people's basic health is an absolute right. You don't have a right to harm me in such ways, and it continues to be on an agenda to make it political. You mean to tell me because I live in a Republican state that my health is less important than somebody who lives in a Democratic state? Like, and I
That's
mean, and I know you're not saying that, but that is clearly what is being
that
itemized at every level.
Mhm.
clearly.
Yeah.
And that's not just for masks. You have to remember, even with affordable health care, I hate to say
Correct.
this to you, but everything stems from what they feel like is important. So even when the money came down for PPE, so major big businesses received it,
Yep.
not people who need the help. And so really, it should not be politicized, but it is. And so your health is only important when the people that you elect think that your health is important. So yes, it starts at the top and works its way down. Even in church, leadership starts at the top and it works its way down. And then you will see, based on how the pastor conducts him or herself, the culture of the church. That is why there's people running around Georgia with no mask on. It's too late now, Mr. Kemp. I mean, Governor Kemp, for you to run around with your mask on a tour because you should have been proactive in the beginning of the doggone virus.
Mm.
So now people are like, whatever, we didn't have to do it.
Yeah. Were you trying to say something, Reverend Holden?
She
So
was.
I wanted to, yes, thank you. I wanted to say that I wasn't saying that our church wasn't um taking responsibility and leading in this. I actually think our church did well, and our medical director, Dr. Miriam Burnett, I think she did excellent in terms of making sure information was
She did.
out there and available. I know the Second Episcopal District had a conference call with her. I'm not sure what everyone else did, but I know that she kind of set out there what the standards and expectations are: mask wearing, not standing close, sitting together, all of the things that she said. But I mean, going back to the political conversation, I think it's fair to say that in this country, our experience since slavery, I mean, everything for us has been political. Even the Union, I mean, even the ending of slavery, slave labor was political, and I think that it takes accountability on our part. But and also, what I hear you all saying is that there's a lost generation. When I was younger, I remember Black folks doing a lot to really help Black folks. I mean, the sororities seemed like they were at their height at that time. You just had a lot of us doing for each other. And it just seems as though some of us have sort of stepped away, which is why gentrification is hitting Atlanta so hard, amongst a variety of reasons. But I think that those are some realities for us as we're talking about mask policies. These are just some very real things coming from Washington D.C. You would look in the city and it was easy to find. I hear people say it all the time, it's chocolate city. Well, it's not that way anymore. And they have truly relocated us and kind of gotten rid of a lot of us, or so it feels. That may not be the case, but most certainly, for as someone that has lived through gentrification, it feels that way. And so I saw a statement from someone on Facebook, and they were talking about South Africa being very progressive, and I said that the last time we were here together. So it does seem as though South Africa is about 10 years ahead of us because they've acknowledged it. And I think so many of us are so afraid to talk about slavery and the impacts and the lasting impact, because that is why we are where we are. And that is also why there is an entire population of people that look like us who are being left out, who don't have the educational level or the educational understanding regarding to even comprehend what's going on right now. And I think that is really a lot of what I'm saying, because I see it all the time in the hospital. You have people come in and they say things like, well, I'm not going to get it, that's just you. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is no, it's not just a me. We all have to wear the mask. Even when I work with our young people, I talk about wearing the mask. I've shown them to wear the mask. We talk about using hand sanitizer. I mean, to me, I believe each one teach one, but I believe that there's something that is obviously not being passed on, because there is a group of our people that are not hearing it. I drove past Washington Park very early on when they first opened things up, and it looked like it was bigger than 4th of July. Mm-hmm. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. Like, we drove down the street, cars past the park. Like, what is going on? Some folks had on a mask, some didn't. And the ones that did look like they felt like somebody made them feel bad for wearing a mask because they had it under their mouth. I'm like, no, wear it over your mouth. So I just think there's a lot of levels here. And I believe the phrase is lack of knowledge, people perish. And this is a clear example of the people perishing, because we're perishing at alarming numbers.
Right. And another thing too is that one solution that we could look at in terms of creating that awareness that you guys are talking about is to give create more awareness of the after effects of COVID-19, where people are getting it, right, and they may be recovering, but their long-standing and permanent damages to your respiratory system, to your kidneys, to your. I've heard, and then I've heard of stories where people are have recovered, in their experience created some underlying conditions, and now some people are being reinfected. And so I just think that creating that awareness that Reverend Haigler talked about, especially, and and I think that awareness will help us, or help this generation, all of our generations that are being affected, to use the vote. Because obviously, this entire thing has been politicized. I think it was Reverend Buckson that said earlier that maybe if we had a Democratic mayor, a Democratic governor, that things would have been a little. And I think that was Reverend Haigler. Things may have been a little different. We did have one person to say that she was in Maryland, where her governor is Republican, and he did give tight mandates and they remain masked up everywhere. And she agrees that the pandemic has indeed been politicized. We're in Georgia. In Georgia's case, Georgia is historically red, and we are in the South. And because of that, then there are a lot of underlying values that come into play when people are making decisions, especially on the state level. And I think a lot of that is getting to be very obvious as we reopen.
But I'm going to say, this is my earnest plea. I understand that there are people in the political lineage and line in the hierarchy, I'll use that term, who do make certain decisions. But for those of us who grew up in those houses where our parents said, as for me and my house, this is what we're going to do, we have to get back to the growth opportunities that we are seeing now from us having been quarantined within our families, to from having us to the different kinds of connections that we've had to do within our churches and communities. We have got to get back to understanding the power of what it means to even have a vote, to be a person who can vote. We're still having that same conversation about, are people going to vote? How do you get the word out about people voting? I mean, we say it over and over and over and over and over again. And not just how do you get the word about voting because you don't like the president who you see on television all the time, but how are we getting the vote out about making sure that we're there to vote for judges and school board members and other things that happen in the interim vote. I mean, in the midterm election, like those are places where we do not really we don't focus our attention because it's not something that we see all the time. People are affected by President Trump and all that because we watch it all the time. Many of us have had to turn it off because it's hurting our spirit. Like after a while, how foolish can somebody else sound? You can't keep saying the same foolishness all the time, and I'm going to keep listening. I know what's going to come out of your mouth. But my earnest plea is that we are becoming much more, and I think, and Reverend Ali, that was the term you used, that we are becoming much more grassroots as it relates to how we are running our communities. We have neighborhood planning units in Georgia, and we have neighbors like in my NPUJ in that area where Councilman Brown, Antonio Brown is. We have 8% home ownership. That is just politics saying quickly, we can come in here and do whatever we want to do. We don't have to abide by anybody. So we can do all. We have to get back to what it means to live in community. And that means holding one another accountable, going to get people, keeping people informed, shaking up some things, protesting as we need to protest, making sure that we don't go to certain businesses in our own communities that don't support us. And it takes time. I get it. It doesn't happen overnight, but we have to get more grassroots. Like I can't my daily living cannot, and I do not ascribe to, my daily living is going to be bent on somebody who does not even understand how much a gallon of milk costs. Can't do it. Like I've got to have more control, and we do have control over what happens in our communities.
I'm glad you brought that up because um, we you said something earlier about the church and the church's response to this, and I did want to talk about that. We looked at a Barna Group study where they surveyed more than 2,300 Protestant pastors, and we found that 93% felt it important that church leadership take some initiative to be more, as you say, grassroots, to be more deliberate about guiding their congregations in thinking about racial justice. And I'm interested in knowing, how you guys feel about that. 7% of the conversation felt that the subject of race was just way too political, which is interesting to me also. So I mean, what do y'all think about this? Dr. Lewis, you look like you
I'm
want.
really wondering what.
Go ahead, Go ahead, Ali.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I'm really wondering what's going on because if if we look to ministers as leaders, I mean, these were historically in the Black community, these were the leaders. That it was a one-stop shop. You could get everything from the church. And so to hear that this is how leadership is thinking, again, it filters down. And so that makes me very saddened, because I could then understand if someone thinks that anything is too political to be discussed in the pulpit. I mean, who was Jesus? I'm almost baffled that the church backs up from stuff like this. I don't understand. Um, I don't understand how any pastor, minister can say that anything is too political, because a lot of folks are coming to the church for guidance. And if you cannot get it and you're shying away from those uncomfortable conversations in the church, I'm at a loss too.
Yeah.
I agree, and I wanted to touch on two things. One, I wanted to go back to Reverend Dr. Susan's comment about the community. And last week, I watched this really disturbing video. It was all over social media about an incident that happened at the corner of Auburn Avenue and Jesse Hill Drive. And there were all these young people who were congregating there and doing this drag racing called Donuts. And I think that we know that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in our country. But then also within our communities, in many of our churches, we attend churches that are not in our community. We drive into our churches, right? And so a long time ago, the church and the community were the same thing. And so I was looking at this video and I was thinking, so before all those young people congregated there on that corner, nobody noticed them standing there. So a long time ago, I think some elders of the community would have come out and talked to these young people. But on social media, you see, it looked like hundreds of them standing out there. But how did they get to a crowd of all those 100 young people? Somebody had to see them congregating. Nobody said anything. So I think that's going back to that whole point of community. And then we were talking about pastors not wanting to discuss race in the churches. I think for us, because we are all members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, our denomination was founded on racial injustice. And so I think for us, it's just common to talk about issues of race and social justice and advocacy in our church since it was founded. And, when you think about in other churches how racism and all the other isms of the country and the world aren't discussed, that is really, it's shocking and it's eye-opening and it's disgusting, because we make up the church, people make up the church. So we have to talk about all of those isms that affect us on a daily basis.
Sometimes I wonder if in African Methodism, if we're actually in a bubble when it comes to social activism. Because, as you say, Dr. Lewis, that's Richard Allen, and even Reverend Holeness, who is Jesus? Jesus, in my view, was the very first social activist, and was the very first one to actually engage. He was only second to God, who created social activism. So how do we not have that discussion in the church? Anybody?
I think one of the pieces that we also have to remember, and I agree, as AMEs, we are, and we also assume that that's what we do, because we also have to remember that there are many, we have a lot of pastors who are also bivocational. That's a whole nother thing. That's a whole other piece. So, or they don't necessarily live within the community. So those pastors that you refer to, they lived within the community as well. The teachers lived within the community. So everybody was, it was very critical that it was a critical, how shall I say, it was a critical aspect of community because everybody congregated in the same place. So when we decided that we were no longer going to live within that community, and move to other communities. And I'm not a separationist or anything like that. But when we decided to shift that culture, we also decided to move the culture capital out of those communities. And so one of the pieces that I hope that many churches will begin to do is to begin to establish opportunities and teach on opportunities for home ownership within the community where the church resides. Especially within our cities where there's blight, to become much more business minded and active as it relates to helping for us to make sure that we're increasing that 8% of home ownership. And it takes one person at a time, one home at a time. It takes one family at a time to make sure that they are investing in a place that might not be what they might not see it now, but it's becoming as we are as Christians, right? I'm not all that I should be, but I'm not all that I should be, but I'm not what I used to be. And my God, can you just wait to see what I'm going to be as I continue to strive and grow in the grace and knowledge of God? And that's the same way as that we have to think when we think of building community. What's the vision for the community? And be dogged about getting in there, because we have people who are often just left, I'll say it again, they're just left to their own devices to do whatever they want as it departs the community, because community simply walks away because they don't want to be bothered. It's time for us to get bothered. It's time for us to, do the Fannie Lou Hamer. Let's revisit Fannie Lou. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Right.
And I got, how long am I gonna let you keep your knee on my neck?
Oh my
Because that's not the place for it, right? And
Right.
so I don't need to put my knee on your neck either. I need to worry about where my feet are walking and what my hands are doing in my community.
Right. Now we did have one person to say that when we talk about the church's response and how the church, what is it, especially the Black church, she says that prosperity ministry is a culprit to the church. That and I guess by that she means that a lot of ministries, a lot of churches have fallen into the capitalistic flow, if you will. And then we have white evangelical ministry that has unfortunately found its way into some of our churches, and no doubt influencing the value system within some churches and some denominations. Anybody have any comment on that one?
But if I can push back on that just a little bit,
Okay.
like, and I guess I see it's Jackie Pinkney. Hey, Sister Reverend Jackie. But one of the pieces that I would actually say is the prosperity ministry as it relates to us leaving our communities and going to other places to make it look like we have something that we don't. Um, and so we do have to speak to that. But truth be told, most of our churches do not still have the same power that it has, because again, the culture capital has been moved out of there. And so the prosperity ministry or the prosperity message, get it where you can, pray for it, it's going to come, the Lord's going to give it to you, all you got to do, just keep pressing, whatever. I get that whole piece. But our prosperity message does have to shift. We prosper in community. The wisdom of the collective is what makes us stronger. And so whenever I hear people talking about the prosperity message, I'm supposed to prosper.
Mhm.
Like, that's what I'm supposed to do. Right? I'm supposed to have an abundance. It's just what kind of abundance am I selling my soul for, an abundance that does not help my brothers and my sisters to also be uplifted.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. That's a great perspective.
And I want to say something also about the root of most of this is still racism, no matter how we try to slice this up and change it up. Because racism creates all type of systemic issues. So even when I was listening to, Dr. Susan say something about home ownership, even in most communities, especially in the inner cities, most banks will not give loans to African Americans. There's still a big disparity of that. We're still fighting this on so many levels across this country and so many groups that I'm in. So it's not sometimes that people don't want to own a home. It's just that they are not given the same opportunities, because there is still redlining occurring in this country. There are still banks that will not give based on your race. And even when we talk about parents showing up to schools, if you come to my neighborhood where I live in Lithonia, which is considered the second most affluent place in the country outside of Prince George County, you're going to see more African Americans at PTA meetings. That's what you're going to see because that's where we
Correct.
live, and that is where we understand the dynamics of your tax dollars. Your property taxes, your children. You need to go show up at school because parental participation, helps with academic, excellence. But when people are in the inner city and they're dealing with so many isms at one time, racism, sexism, classism, especially racism, because many of them can't afford to live anywhere else. And they don't even have the wherewithal to be able to have property ownership so they can go into a school district where their children will thrive or send their children to private school. So because many of them are working 2 and 3 jobs. And so the church really does have a responsibility. Like I totally agree with her to start teaching home ownership, but at the same time, we've got to push back on a system that once we teach it will not even allow them to live there. So with so many dynamics at play, because racism, it's not always, somebody calling you out of your name. It's not always the blatant stuff that we see every day. It's the simple things about somebody being in a bank deciding who will get a loan and who will not. I mean, we got to really go deep into this thing and change some of these societal ills that have been occurring generation after generation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And here's one of my pieces. I think that um, the vision is that the Bible says that we're supposed to be lenders and not borrowers, right? Think about as it relates even to one of the pieces you said about um, Black businesses being able to get the paycheck protection and the different COVID relief opportunities. We talked about this before as well, Dr. White, in another session, right? There are so many churches who had to do that because we had been derelict on establishing ourselves in a manner where, and there's some, and I'm gonna make a caveat, establishing ourselves even in the church setting to be lenders and not borrowers. And think about those banks, those churches who started credit unions. Like you don't see that happening too much anymore, right?
Yeah.
But establishing ourselves so that, and we think all of us, AME, the power of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, just in our spending capital alone when we go to General Conference. Come on now. I mean, it's how we focus our funds and what we see as important at that particular time. We can purchase houses as churches. That's a vision, right? We have to see ourselves flipping ministry from being inside of the sanctuary, singing hallelujah and doing the hallelujah chorus and doing all those things that we tend to do, to saying, how do we get outside of these walls, which COVID has forced us to do in a manner that we have never seen before?
Yep.
How do we get outside of these walls to make sure that we are really doing those things that impact people who really don't know how to, don't have the means to, and are not allowed to, as you said, Reverend D, are not allowed to because of things that they cannot even see and don't understand. They're not allowed to be able to prosper in a particular way. That's the role of the church and our community leaders, to make sure that we are standing as advocates side by side with people when they go to the bank.
That's
I
right.
mean, that's the vision. We have to shift to that. And I just as a caveat, I recall a gentleman who just needs to get a birth certificate, right? Like I needed somebody to just walk with him through the process because he did not understand, he could not get it done. But the point, leaving him to his own devices, he was getting ready to lose everything because he didn't have his birth certificate. He couldn't get other information. But we had to have somebody to literally walk with him to do those kinds of things. And that has opened the door. And so it's that might seem like a small thing, but it's the intimate pieces that we must do as leaders in the church and in our community, as missionaries, amen. Those things we must do in order to make a difference in somebody's life.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, because especially answering that question in terms of how can the church respond? How and is the black church doing enough? Now, in my view, the black church is not doing enough to and what else can we do? Well, we talk about that a lot on our segment when we talk about what's actually going on in the church. And so for our last question, I just want to kind of wrap things up. Um, there's been a lot of gun violence lately. Just this past weekend and over the holiday here in Atlanta, we had the shooting death of an 8-year-old girl they who was just basically a victim of circumstance. But the issue of gun violence has come up not just in Georgia, but we're talking about it in states like Louisiana, New York City, and so I'm interested in knowing, ladies, what your thoughts are in terms of what's going on with our, with the sudden surge of gun violence. Anybody?
I don't even think there's necessarily a surge in gun violence as there is attention to it. Now let me be very clear. The only dynamic that I do not like is one that we have this thing called black on black crime, because all crime is going to be perpetuated against your own race by others of your own race because you're in close proximity. But that still does not give a pass to black folk who are here killing other black people in general. Now we've got to address this. Now, um, a lot of us don't want to say, because we don't want to convolute the issues, but let me be clear, we cannot, as a community, just have black folk running around killing other black people. But this comes from someplace. It really does come from someplace. So certain people in certain areas have a propensity to hopeless people will do almost anything. And we live in a culture that is violent. Everything you see, this is the most of industrialized countries in the world. This is the most violent. See, so we've learned this behavior from someplace else. So we got to first of all address that as a people. We have learned violence from people who kidnapped us from our continent and then put us to work for free and use violence towards us the entire time we were enslaved, and continue to use violence as we try to get to where we are today, and still using violence because we live all, we're fighting now about police brutality because that is violence. So this nation was built on violence. So people care more about their guns and their property than they do each other, than human lives. So we try to mimic the larger culture, not even understanding what that really means to us, not even understanding who we are, that we're gods and kings and queens and stuff. Do you understand? Like that we're made in the image and likeness of God, and that this should not be. But again, the church has a role in this. The church has got to speak to young people out in the streets who are harming each other, to let them know you cannot and you should not do this, because that is not who we are.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm mostly concerned, especially here in the state of Georgia, where a lot of the stores or retailers are reporting that people are just coming out and they're just buying guns, and even just last night, we had a group of people. I don't know if they were young people, but just a group of people, that were just out having a disagreement, and somebody just decided, hey, I'm just going to start shooting. And so when you cannot constructively resolve conflict without letting a bullet go, then that's my biggest concern. That we have to be, as a church, we have to be more proactive in educating young people on conflict resolution. That's a start right there. That's very grassroots. And so, and in our schools, and we have to set an example as well. So, that's pretty much my perspective on that. Ladies, I appreciate your input. We could go on and on. Because it's like some of these subjects are related very closely to other subjects. And so that is just the vision of the Women's Laboratory. It gives us an opportunity to give our perspective and things that, things that are relevant to our community. And it gives us an opportunity to say, hey, this is what's important. And this is the way that we should be looking at things. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. A special thanks to Keystone Public Radio. And as we leave you, please remember the famous words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, that whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. So long, everyone.
Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective.